Hey, that'll help. Have my camera actually on. Nathan Baird from Indy Star here, wrapping up Purdue's 35 to nothing loss to number two Oregon. Really not a lot to break down. I don't think from an X's and O's standpoint. Frankly, it's the middle of the night, and I have to be back at Mackey Arena tomorrow at noon to watch some basketball. So let's jump right to the elephant in the room. I got just an absolute malpractice of a haircut this week. It has not been helped by wearing my beanie that it got a little bit too cold now in Indiana this week. But so if anyone out there has experience litigation malpractice attorneys out there who can help me go after the people at Great Clips, I shouldn't say that. They're fine people. Just this one didn't go as planned, and neither did Purdue's game, I suppose. Although not an unexpected result tonight, but an uninspiring one, I think, is the best way to put it. And especially coming on the heels of what Purdue accomplished in that loss at Illinois and an opportunity to maybe build some momentum going into the off week. And instead, while they were able to shorten the game with the way that they ran their offense, this still seemed like a reversion to what we saw before. Maybe that's not completely fair. Oregon scored 3 quick touchdowns. And then from a defensive standpoint, Purdue did stabilize things for a while. But as we have often seen, they just keep throwing the defense out there and out there and out there with not really much relief from the offense. And the next thing you know, there's a couple more scores added on to the end of this thing. So I'm not going to like break down every facet of this game, but I am going to just touch on some topics and try to hit the topics that are out there among the people that I'm hearing from. And I don't even, this may not even need to be addressed, but I'll go ahead and say it just to be out in front of things. I know that there is a vocal segment, and maybe it's just the people that I hear from on Twitter that are under the illusion that Purdue is bailing out on this mid-season as an administration and making some kind of change. I can assure you that is not in the process. Like any, all indications from the people that I've talked to, while there is a lot of frustration, while nobody enjoys what is going on right now with Purdue football, that this is not at a panic juncture where you have to start making changes. Now, they have made changes, obviously, and it's fair to bring this up in some ways as a conversation because Ryan Walters started the atmosphere of firing people when he moved on from Graham Harrell, and the performance in 2 of the 3 games since then offensively has been just as bad as it was before that change. So it's fair to bring up. And it's a conversation that at this trajectory will become very urgent at the end of the season. But for a couple of reasons, I think this is something people should just take out of their minds. There's no reason for this to happen in the middle of this season. And here's a few reasons why. When Mike Bobinsky made that decision in 2016 in the middle of a season, not only was it Daryl Hazel's 4th season, but let's face it, Mike Bobinsky was hired to move on from Daryl Hazel and hire the next coach, and this was just starting that process. But I covered that team. I was the Journal and Courier beat writer for that team, and even in my sort of novice perspective, I could see that there were locker room issues with that team, that it had just been a 4-year grind that had taken them down, and you felt it when you were around those guys. And there were issues on the coaching staff that I thought were pretty apparent in terms of who was maybe that some fracturing had started to take place, at least from my perspective. Neither of those things appear to be happening at all right now. The people that I talk to say that there is still belief in that locker room in Ryan Walters. There's still belief in this athletic administration in Ryan Walters. So if there were a caustic environment building, then I think that would push them towards having to do something now. As it stands, there's going to be 5 more games this year. where Ryan Walters and this staff get to make their case as to why they can turn this around. But it absolutely has to be turned around. And if you think that the athletic administration is not looking for progress in the final 5 games of this season, I can assure you that they are. The progress has shifted. I think everyone came into this season thinking progress would mean moving from 4-8 to bowl contention, something along those lines. And instead, now it's just progress from kind of a flatline situation, especially with this offense, to how do you compete? Like, if they're not in the fourth quarter with a chance to win games against Northwestern, Michigan State, and maybe Indiana, all three certainly, then I think things you have to have a tough conversation. But the big one, the only thing that matters right now, and I probably talked even too much about that, but I'm hearing it from so many people. There's been such a wave of that out there that I felt like it needed to be addressed, but there's just absolutely no indication that we're dealing with something like that going into a bye week of a coach's second season. This is just a team that can't get out of its own way right now. You can point in every single game to places where they could have turned the complexion of a game and just don't do it. Less tonight, I thought. Less tonight. The closest it came tonight was, a punt, 64-yard punt. Keenan Crimmins down to the 1. They downed it at the 1, and then Oregon goes 99 plays and 6 yards and makes it 21-0. And really, at that point, the best thing you can say is that when things would have folded maybe a few weeks ago, this team is still fighting through the second half, even of games that the outcome might be a foregone conclusion. That team was trying to get in the end zone tonight and wasn't able to, obviously. But what is about to happen now, as I wrote in my insider for IndyStar.com, like the schedule says they're off next weekend. They're about to face their most important opponent of the season, perhaps. And it is not Northwestern in 2 weeks, though that kind of becomes a referendum on what's going on here. But it is themselves. It's their own self-destructive tendencies. They have to conquer those in the span of these next 2 weeks. I think to expect this team to come out on the other side of an Ohio State game. Oregon may not be the most talented team they play this year. I know Oregon just beat Ohio State by 1 point in its own stadium, but we'd see what would happen with those teams on a neutral field. I don't know. Penn State also very strong, obviously. But again, I think 3 of these last 5 are teams that are at least in their weight class. But the big thing is you cannot still be shooting yourself in the foot. You heard that phrase came up, self-inflicted wounds came up a lot in the post-game press conference tonight. And whether it was Reggie Love, whether it was Ryan Walters himself, like that phrase was out there. And there's a lot of frustration right now about, frankly, veteran offensive linemen committing pre-snap penalties. That's one thing that has absolutely not panned out this year, is that the veteran offensive linemen were going to sort of come together and make this offense better. Has not happened. They were a detriment to the offensive procedures tonight. So you've got to cut those penalties down. There has to also just be a better, more consistent early down production. I have it in the insider. I don't have it in front of me. I think they ran up to the point where it was 35-0. So into the fourth quarter, Purdue had run 19 first and 10 plays and gained, I think it was 54 yards. So less than 3 yards per play on first and 10 plays. So that means on average, you're looking at worse than 2nd and 7 on the most first down plays that you ran in this game, and completely unsustainable. You do not have in Ryan Brown a quarterback, I don't think, who can go up against a team like Oregon with an arm behind its back like that. I think you're in the same way that Oregon, the same way that Dylan Gabriel today, with the success that they were having on first and second down, like they were barely even at third down. I think in the first half, they had 2 first down attempts, I believe, in the first half. One was third and goal with inches to go. They didn't Purdue stuffed them, but then they got in on fourth down. And then there was one that they did convert later in the first half. So only 2 times did they even attempt a third down. I believe that's correct in the first half. That tells you an offense is rocking, right? And Purdue was able to get a turnover and force a punt, at least one punt or two. But Purdue shortened the game. Purdue ran an offense with some deliberation. Maybe this is sort of their Tony Bennett homage. They ran a pretty deliberate attack and shortened the number of possessions that Oregon had and kept the ball away from them. But Oregon's still explosive enough, talented enough. They're not going to shut them out, obviously, at that point. You still gave up 5 touchdowns. And this offense is still just not with any consistency moving the ball up the field. That's just the name of the game. Get it from point A to point B being as close to the end zone as you can get repeatedly. And to Spencer Porath missing another field goal, which he had made 5 straight before tonight, and then missed the 36-yarder tonight. It's not good to not have that kind of consistency. At the same time, this team has to quit asking him to be 100% of the scoring offense in the first half of games. Another scoreless first quarter. They've been outscored, I think, 59-0 in the first quarters of games. Came in as the lowest scoring team in the nation in first halves this year. I think it was 3.1 points per game, and then obviously got shut out. So that's going to drop again. It's going to drop for the second week in a row, even though it was only 3.2 a couple weeks ago. It's just until Purdue figures things out earlier in games and seizes control earlier in games, it's still just constantly working from behind, playing from behind, having to try to overcome itself. This isn't going to get fixed. This is not going to head in a positive direction. I think that's the number one thing I look for in that Northwestern game. Maybe it's a tandem of those things. It's just playing cleaner, playing more efficient, and then they've got to get a lead. Like, go into halftime with a lead against a team like Northwestern at home. Like, that is such a low bar to try to clear. And yet, repeatedly, really over the last 2 years, I just wrote a story this week for IndyStar.com about how few times, I think they've led 3 times at halftime against FBS opponents so far in Ryan Walters' tenure. And there may be like 2-1 in those games. And maybe it was only 2. It's scant opportunities. So those 2 things really jump to mind as to what has to get accomplished. Some updates. Hudson Card was not cleared in time. I think we even talked about this earlier in the week. It wasn't just that he had to be cleared by Friday. It's you have to be cleared in time. And concussion protocol has some specific things that it accounts for. But you got to be clear in time to practice and be ready to play. And I was skeptical all week that would happen. We saw him at practice on Wednesday, but I didn't know what participation level that was. I didn't know what to put out there for that. Didn't get a good indication, but I was always skeptical that he would play. He was unavailable. But Ryan Walters said he fully expects him to play against Northwestern or be able to play. So now that's a question. Do you play both of these quarterbacks? Ryan Brown did not have a especially good game tonight. I mean, it was all of that sort of certainty that he played with at Illinois, really from the jump, was interrupted in this game, I thought. And some of that's probably just playing Oregon, and Oregon's got better players than Illinois. And I still think you saw just some hesitancy and borderline like confusion. Some of that is they were expanding the playbook. I asked Ryan Walters, you were upfront about the process you had to go through to be in a position where you could call offense. Is that expanding? Like, what's happening there? And he said, yes, they're adding more things in. It's also opponent dependent. So which opponent you're going up against, you're going to be working in those plays and pulling some out, which is how all offenses do. It's just that you're not usually kind of trying to tutor a guy along with it to get up to speed on what you're trying to do as an offense. It's not me criticizing Ryan Walters necessarily, because I think he made kind of a bold decision to do this to try to stabilize the offense. But tonight was not really an indication that had worked. Again, it's tough. Oregon's just so much better. Purdue went out and tried to repair its roster via the portal with some strategic pickups here and there, and Oregon is reportedly going out and spending $20 million or whatever. Like it's not always a fair game here. They're in the same conference, doesn't mean they're in the same league, figuratively. But that's still up in the air, and I think it's honestly the one benefit they have now is that Northwestern has to prepare as if both those guys could play. And as much as Ryan Walters and Jason Simmons say they can run the same offense with both, there's obviously some either big or perhaps even just esoteric differences between the two that opposing defensive coordinators would have to take account for. Nyland Green, it sounds like, is a serious injury. Ryan Walters indicated that I think he called it significant. Did not come right out and say he's not going to be back this season, but it doesn't sound good for him to play much if again this year. He did say, though, CJ Smith was listed as questionable. He warmed up before this game, did not play, but Ryan Walters did definitively say CJ Smith is going to play against Northwestern. And we've talked about him since preseason camp as if he is this certainty of a weapon, and he certainly has some attributes that are measurable in terms of speed. We don't know if he can play yet, and we're not going to know until he does. So that still sounds like a big, in some of these games where they are right now talent equated, and Northwestern should absolutely be one of those. If you can just take that one position and give Purdue a talent advantage over the slot corners, or best case scenario for Purdue, a receiver or a linebacker you can get him matched up with and take advantage of it. And maybe it only has to happen once or twice a game to start flipping some of the more talent equated, not Ohio State, not the Oregons of the world, not the Notre Dames, but the more talented equated ones that could be potentially a piece of the mix that's been missing. So we'll find out more. This is they take Saturday off. Sunday they come back in, do their film, and I think the way Ryan Walters phrased it, like put that game to bed. And then you get a few days of practice for Northwestern, and then the coaches go off recruiting, and they need to do some recruiting. They've had some losses in that realm here in the last couple of weeks, as you all well know. So got to repair some of that, and they're going to try to do that in the next week. And then the week after that, just a normal game week. But I think like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if they practice there too, like just critical practices for this team and for this program. And being able to come up for air out of this 2-week span and put a better product on the field against Northwestern, put a functioning offense, especially with a functioning passing game, a balanced offense in terms of at least an opponent having to respect both. Just critical. If you don't do that, if too much of what we saw in the first 7 games gets dragged into that game, then you just wonder what's going to be on the plate, because then you have to go to Columbus the week after that. They're not going to beat Ohio State. Ohio State is going to probably pound them. Like Ohio State isn't going to have what Oregon just did, having to come cross country on a short week, missing a couple of your best players. Like a fully healthy Ohio State, and they've got some injuries, offensive line and some other places, but I would fully expect that team to put up way more points than Purdue is capable of scoring right now, even if they can shorten the game again. So I think Northwestern is an important line in the sand for this team. What kind of progress, the lessons learned from these first 7 games, and they were tough lessons. What do you take from those and apply them to just that game? Like, how do you figure out to win just that game? Because at some point, um, winning without winning, in whether you mean the close loss to Illinois, whether you mean keeping Oregon at a respectable deficit, like winning without winning has its value for a team that was sort of careening off the tracks a couple weeks ago, but it can't be the theme of the second half. The theme of the second half has to be Purdue can win again. Purdue has to win games, and that's a big one to start with. So I'm going to sign off there. I'll be at Fan Day tomorrow, so look for coverage of that from at least the men's scrimmage from anystar.com. Won't be there for the 9 a.m. women, unfortunately, but I believe Ethan will be, for those of you who follow our coverage there. So we'll have coverage of both and more talk from Boilers Extra next week.